Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well. So last week I kind of had a discussion about how gender is presented within the game Cyberpunk 2077 and how that game kind of mixes and confuses gender within its ability to select different aspects of gender within that game. And while that game was more complex, I also had very intriguing feelings about another game that decided to tackle different gender representations within its own character selection screen in the game Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Sorry, it's a long, weird title that I get confused. Black Ops Cold War, Call of Duty Warframe, Frozone, Cold War, Black Ops, Modern Warfare, Infinity War. I don't know, too many subtitles. But in all seriousness, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War had me really kind of thinking in a different way from Cyberpunk 2077 about how gender is being presented and kind of, I don't want to say misunderstood in Call of Duty's case, but not fully integrated or appreciated in an interesting way. And I kind of wanted to just kind of touch upon and discuss how I see gender being presented within Call of Duty and how it sort of threw me out in a very intriguing way. And I'm not condemning the game at all. I just found it interesting and wanted to discuss it. So within Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, in the main game, you're playing basically a 1980s paranoia thriller conspiracy plot set during the Cold War, during the Ronald Reagan's presidency. And in that game, as you go fight in the Vietnam War, and that's its own whole other thing about the aggrandizing of the Vietnam War, even though that was a whole separate moral conflict and separate moral discussion that I don't want to dismiss, but is sort of outside the bounds of this. But anyways, as you're going through this conspiracy thriller plot, you can choose to play your main character as different genders. You can choose to be male, female, or non-binary. And basically all that choice that matters for in the game is it's basically your pronouns. If you choose male, you get he, him pronouns, female, you get she, her pronouns, and you choose non-binary, you get they, them pronouns. There's something to be said about sometimes non-binary people will use different types of pronouns, but ultimately, it's saying male, female, non-binary, but in terms of how the game plays out, it's really just pick your pronouns. Is the only real thing that's happening there, which is honestly just fine. I find it kind of cool that Call of Duty would take the time to, implement and have characters say lines like, they are my friend, or they should go do this, instead of just she and he, that they actually took the time to record those lines and be inclusive of a gender neutral type pronoun. I think that that's honestly really cool. And I think that most games should do that going forward. I would add the change of saying just select your pronouns as opposed to select gender, because that's sort of a more accurate way to define how that's implemented within the game. But as it is, I think that's honestly cool and something that pretty much every single game, especially one of the size that has the ability to record that many lines and re-record that many lines, they should be implementing that. I think that that's something that would be very cool for a game that doesn't necessarily need a fixed gendered protagonist, like something like, God of War, which requires a certain gendered character in Kratos. But if it's a character that doesn't matter, I think that we should have, male, female, non-binary, or, she, her, he, him, they, them as a selection that you can make for your characters going forward. I think that that's great, and I think that's wonderful. The issue that confounds me a little bit within Call of Duty, though, and why it kind of throws me just a hair, is just the context within where non-binary is being placed in this story. Because as I said, this story takes place in the 1980s, during the Cold War. And two things happen because of that. One, non-binary understanding wasn't really a thing during the Cold War. And so it is kind of weird to have this big spy thriller thing going on, where you're taking down Russian spies and you're trying to sneak into bases and especially in Russia, which even at the time during the 1980s, but also in America as well, was not accepting of LGBTQ people in general, let alone having any understanding of what it meant to be non-binary. So to see the Russian bad guy come in and be like, look at them, like using gender neutral pronouns for me is weird. It just feels weird and kind of like this glamorization of what I wish the world was, but also it's the Cold War. So it's not like a glamorization necessarily of what the world was, because the Cold War was kind of horrible for a lot of people involved, especially when we go to something like Vietnam, which was awful. And again, that game sort of aggrandizes that in a very weird and uncomfortable way that I don't feel comfortable with, killing Vietnamese people and having it be a fun level for me to play. And so it's this weird, have fun during the Cold War, and we accept non-binary people, including Russians, who would kill LGBTQ people and still kind of pseudo do that today. It feels weird in that context. But to a degree, I'm less uncomfortable with that as sort of like, yeah, whatever. It's just a fun 1980s paranoia thriller plot. I'm actually more uncomfortable with, like I said, the Vietnamese part, where it's just like, yeah, we're going to have fun in the Vietnam War. That feels weirder to me. So all that stuff is just sort of an academic, like, that's interesting, but ultimately, whatever. It's just meant to be a shooty, blowy up things game, and whatever. It doesn't, it allows non-binary people to not be misgendered as they play their fun little blowy uppy game, even though it takes place during a time where that wouldn't have happened. And I'm not necessarily asking for Call of Duty to be the most realistic in that terms. But as I said, what bothers me more in this game is kind of a thing that bothers me about the politics of Call of Duty in general. And here's what I mean. The choice to select being non-binary, or the choice to select your gender, comes right after a cutscene in the game where Ronald Reagan comes into the room and says stuff like it's an actual representation of Ronald Reagan, the president, a man who actually existed, saying we need to take down the Russians and beat evil. And it's this weird look how cool it is that Reagan's here, right? It's played as this really cool moment of look, it's Reagan, and we're definitely during the Cold War. So again, it's this sort of glossing over of this moment of history. But for LGBTQ people, Ronald Reagan is to put it as nicely as possible, a divisive figure. For many LGBT people, he is an active villain to the queer community. Ronald Reagan actively ignored and in many ways helped the HIV pandemic and epidemic that ravaged the LGBTQ community in the 1980s. The entire LGBTQ community in the 1980s in New York was traumatized and devastated by the HIV pandemic and epidemic. People were going to funerals daily. People were dying daily. That is a very real trauma that many people in the queer community still feel today, right now, because of all the harm that they had to go through. And at best, Ronald Reagan ignored that because people were gay, and there is active proof of that. I know that might get contentious to people in the comments who may love Ronald Reagan, but there is proof of that. He even made jokes about it at many times during his presidency. And there is also proof that he just didn't care and actively helped fund things that, denied, queer people from getting help that they needed. Know more about that. There are plenty of places that you can Google and look up to learn more about the specifics of that situation. But to basically just make the point here for as it pertains to our conversation in Call of Duty, Ronald Reagan was harmful to the queer community. So it is very weird for me playing the game to see a scene where it's playing Ronald Reagan as the hero, as this cool figure who's yeah, we're going to beat the Russians. Then immediately go to hey, pick your gender. And we're going to just ignore the fact that if you choose non-binary, that we're just going to ignore the fact that non-binary people were harmed not only within Russia, the enemy of the game, but within the US by the man that this game is himself being aggrandized by the game. And I know people will say well, this is just the game being apolitical. This is the game just trying to avoid, your woke politics. Why do you have to bring your woke politics into everything? Why can't we just have a fun game where it's Ronald's but the choice to say Ronald Reagan is cool, to ignore the concerns and problems that Ronald Reagan caused to the queer community, the LGBTQ community, is itself a political statement. You don't get to say hey, this is an apolitical game, and then say Ronald Reagan was a cool dude, because saying Ronald Reagan was a cool dude, was a cool cat, is a political statement. He is a political figure that existed who did things. And to say he was a cool person is itself, it's a political statement. Whether you want it to be or not, whether you intend it to be or not, that is a political statement. The creators of Call of Duty, whether they want to be apolitical or not, are saying a political statement when they say Ronald Reagan is a cool thing within this game. Again, whether they want to or not. So it feels really weird to me to just ignore the harm he did and then immediately go to a thing that enables you to ignore that queer people were harmed during this time period. And again, it's one of those hard things that's yes, I get it. It's a big shooty up, blow uppy things game that's just meant to be a fun, have fun in a Robert Redford-esque, paranoia conspiracy thriller. We're not here to make anyone feel uncomfortable, just here to have fun. But I am made uncomfortable by the choices that they made to try to avoid discomfort. It feels weird to me as a LGBTQ person. And it feels weird to have those choices right next to each other. Of here's Ronald Reagan, who's cool, now pick your pronouns. feels off to me for some reason. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not condemning Call of Duty. I mean, I played the game. I had fun with it. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was more Call of Duty. It wasn't anything super special as a game. It was, more Call of Duty. So I don't want to be like, yeah, just take down this game. I'm not here to condemn it. But I do think it's worth noting the tension within which this game tries to situate itself and how it kind of fails to address certain things in its effort to be apolitical, which is itself a political statement. So that's just where I kind of wanted to end things. If you want a better discussion, by the way, of not just gender within Call of Duty, but just sort of like how the Call of Duty game series has pretended to be apolitical when it's instead making political choices, whether the game creators intend to or not. Jacob Geller, who is one of my favorite YouTubers of all time, did a great video on last year's Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the reboot of that series. He did a great video that I'll link down below, so please check out that video, because I think Jacob Geller does a great job discussing that game and Call of Duty as a whole, and in many ways that those criticisms still kind of apply, though less specifically, but they still kind of apply to Black Ops Cold War as well. So I'd highly recommend that for like further discussion on this topic. If you want more discussions on Call of Duty and politics and video games and things like that, very much a recommended video. But beyond that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you subscribe for more discussion of gender and geek culture and video games and all that sort of stuff. I also have a Patreon that you can help support me at, and I'd love to hear your comments down in the thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe. I kind of lost track of that end screen there because this is a weird ramble. But I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you to all of my patrons this month, but especially Amanda Ronye Idanya, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Ellen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Munir Amlani, Chamomile T., Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Roar, Christina Dalliance, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Michael Beam. She sells seashells by the seashore of Bajor. William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, The Sir Spence, BBD, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Jason Knott, Andrew Jorgensen, Chris Brown, Jasmine, Maeve, Bree Beecher, Sabraxis, Skylar Gray, Nathan Steele, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Wen Dizzlebizzle, Gretchen Badger, Geek Filter, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Sarah Bastam, Polly Mina, Jacob Tovar, Piston Twisted Garage, Lily, Jean Mithun, Andrew Lamori, Lysa, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and KT Dunn. Thank you so much to all of you. You're quite literally making my dreams come true, so I cannot tell you how thankful I am.